Our next talk is on the plain, simple reality of entropy. And we all know that you need randomness and entropy if you want to do something like encryption or generate keys. And if you don't want to do it the XKCD way, using only 4 as the random number, you need a cryptographically secure pseudo-random number generator. And what this is, how it works, and where you can find one will be the topic of this talk. So I present to you Filippo Valsorda on how I learned to stop worrying and love urandom.
Hello. Okay, I'm very glad so many people showed up, even if I essentially gave away the entire content of the talk in the description. Want me to stop to leave something? Okay, no. Anyway, hi, I'm Filippo Valsorda. I work for Cloudflare. I do cryptography and systems engineering. I recently implemented the DNSSEC implementation of the Cloudflare DNS server. And maybe in April 2014, you used my Herbleed test. Anyway. Well, thank you. Okay. Anyway, I'm here to tell you about random bytes. So here are some random bytes. They're pretty good. You can use them. But if you need more, Amazon sells this excellent book full of 1 million random numbers. Anyway, more seriously, random numbers are central to a lot of the security protocols and systems of our modern technology. The most obvious is encryption keys. You obviously want your encryption key to be random, to be really hard to predict, and you want your encryption key to be different from the person next to you, unless you're doing key escrow, which, well, we don't want. So, and also a lot of other different systems use randomness to prevent all kinds of attack. One amongst many, DNS, using random key re-IDs to prevent Kaminsky attacks. So, what makes a stream, a source of random bytes, good? So what are we looking for when we look for good random bytes? First of all, we look for uniform random bytes. Every time we draw a random byte from our random byte source, we want to have the same probability to get all values from 0 to 255. For example, you don't want your distribution to look like this. This is RC4. But that's not enough. You also want your random bytes to be completely unpredictable. And here is where the task actually becomes difficult. Because if you think about it, we are programming computers. Computers are very deterministic machines, even if they don't feel like they are. And they're essentially machines built to sequentially execute always the same set of instructions, which we call code. And when we ask them at some point to do something that is completely different every time they do it, and two equal computers should do it differently, we get in trouble. So where can a computer source this randomness? Where can a computer find unpredictability if it can't have its own? Obviously, in our messy meat world, in our physical world, where everything is not always happening the same way. So, user inputs. Every time you type on the keyboard, you do that with different timings. When you move your mouse around, you do that differently every time. Or simply reading from disk. Every time your computer reads something from disk, it takes a slightly different amount of time. Or interrupt times, I/O, you get the idea. So all these events are visible to the kernel. The kernel is the component of your system which is controlling all these interactions with the outside world and can measure them and observe them with the right precision. And Each of these events can have a wide or narrow range of different possible values. For example, when you read from disk, it might take from 0.17 nanoseconds to 1.3 nanoseconds. I made numbers up. How wide this range is what we call entropy. Essentially, it's how many different values, how spread apart the values are, which also means how easy they are to predict. But something that they definitely aren't is uniform, because as I said, for example, reading from disk might take in a specific range, definitely not from 0 to 255 nanoseconds. That would be. And usually they're not enough to satisfy all our random bytes needs, right? So now we have some unpredictability. We have some events that we can see from our system, and we want to turn that into a stream of random bytes that we can use to generate SSH keys and DNS key IDs, etc. Enter a CSPRNG. Cryptographers like their acronyms very long. It's a cryptographically secure pseudo-random number generator. It's not that hard to pronounce. Okay, it is. Anyway, it's nothing else than a cryptographic tool that takes some input and generates an unlimited, reasonably unlimited, stream of random uniform bytes which depend on all and only the inputs you gave to the CSPRNG. So you can see how we can use this. We have this amount of random events. We feed that into the CSPRNG, and we get out random bytes that we can use for everything. So to understand how a CSPRNG works, I decided to simply present you with a very simple one based on hash functions. I assume that everyone in the hall knows essentially what hash functions are, but the properties we care about today of hash functions are the fact that the output is uniform. If you take the output of a hash function, all the bits should be undistinguishable from random if you don't know the input. It's impossible to reverse a hash function. If I give you the output of a hash function, you should know nothing more than before about what the input of the hash function is, unless you can specifically figure out the input and try the hash function. And finally, it takes an unlimited amount of input and makes a fixed amount of output. These are the properties that we're going to use to build a CSPRNG out of hash functions. So this is how it works. We start with a pool. We call pool an array of bytes, and we fill it with zeros to start. Then every time a new event comes in, for example, you move the mouse around, we take that event, we serialize it to some binary format, doesn't really matter. For example, mouse is at position 15,235. And we hash together, we hash the concatenation of our pool, which for now is just zeros, and the serialization of this event. We hash them together, we get an output, and that's our new value of the pool. And we repeat. Now, instead of zeros, we have the output from before. Now we have this output, and a new event happens. A disk read happens, and it takes exactly 1.27589 nanoseconds. And we hash together the old contents of the pool, this information, disk read happened, and it took this amount of time. We hash them together, and we get a new value of the pool. You see where this is going? We keep doing this. Every time a new event comes in, every time the mouse moves, every time a CPU interrupt is raised, every time disk read happens, we call this steering function to mix this event into this pool. And what do we end up with? We end up with what we call an entropy pool. Now, to figure out this value, you need exactly all the events that lead to this value. If you're an attacker and you really want to figure out what my entropy pool is, you're not supposed to have any better way to figure it out than to guess all the different hard disk timings and mouse movements that happened all the way up to now. Okay? So now we have this essentially unpredictable value, but now we want to generate keys out of it, and we can't just use these few bytes here. So we can use again hash functions. Same hash function. We take the entropy pool and we hash it with a counter. You want 5,000 random bits? Sure. You hash entropy pool and 0, entropy pool and 1, and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 9. You get all these outputs, you concatenate them, and now you have 5,000 bits, which are as unpredictable as all the events that were steered into the pool. Let's think about it for a second. We said that hash functions are not invertible. So even if you know one of the outputs, you can't get back to the entropy pool. And we said that hash functions have, with hash functions, all the bits in the input affect all the bits of the output. So even if just the counter changes between one run and the other, the output is completely unrelated. So did we get what we want? It's uniform, because we said before, hash functions' outputs are uniform. It's unpredictable, because the only way an attacker has to figure out what the output will be is imagine or brute force, or observe, I guess, all the hard disk timings and user inputs, which is impossible for a third party. And it's unlimited, because we can keep incrementing that counter forever. Now, really, please don't go implement this scheme and say, Filippo told me it was OK. No, also because it's exactly not what this talk is about. So if CSPRNGs, if we have this tool to turn some unpredictable events into an unlimited stream of random bytes, which is what we need, and we have all these unpredictable events observed by the kernel, doesn't it make sense to just put a CSPRNG in the kernel and just have the kernel run the CSPRNG when we need random bytes? Turns out, it's such a good idea that it's exactly what Linux did and all the other operating systems. In Linux, it's called dev-urandom, and it looks like a file. You read it like a file, and it's technically a character device. And every time you read 100 bytes from it, it runs a CSPRNG on an entropy pool, not different from the one I presented. And this entropy pool is steered with all the events that the kernel saw happen from its privileged position. Other operating systems have something similar. OS X and BSD have dev-random, which is exactly what dev-urandom is on Linux. And on Windows, you can get something similar with the crypt-gen-random call. One last thing. Putting the CSPRNG in the kernel is not only about convenience. It's also about security. Because, first of all, the kernel is the entity that can observe the unpredictable events. If you take a CSPRNG, which is just code, so you can implement your own, and you implement it in your library or in your application, now you have the problem of how do you take the random, the unpredictable events from the kernel and take them to the application. This is something that you can